and now we can get to know Anne and Paul and a little bit more about this amazing book that the two of you have written and the lessons that we can learn. But before we dive into that, Anne, Paul, tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and how the two of you came together to write this book.
Well, so I run the journalism program at Santa Rosa Junior College in Santa Rosa, California. Paul, for 20 years, was the editorial director at the Press Democrat newspaper, and the two of us actually met in the late '80s, early '90s when we both worked at the same for the same news organization on the San Francisco Peninsula. And then we both ended up in the Santa Rosa area. So we've stayed in touch, stayed friends. And I got consumed by this story of what happened at Villa Capri and Verena at these two senior care homes during this massive wildfire known as the Tubbs wildfire. I was helping a former student who was making a documentary about the fire, and I interviewed one. She wanted me to find people who had interesting fire stories to tell, and I found Melissa Langles, one of these two women who raced up to Villa Capri, this assisted living and memory care center in the middle of the fire. She raced up to save her mother and ended up staying to help rescue all 60 residents there. So initially, after this amazingly emotional interview where all three of us were crying, I realized there's a lot more to the story. I roped Paul in. I told him we were going to write a couple of articles maybe, and would he be interested? He had since left the Press Democrat. I thought he might miss journalism. So naively, he said, sure. And one interview led to 110. We acquired these depositions that no one else has seen. They were sealed soon after we acquired them from the first legal challenge to the events of that night. And it was just this treasure trove. We started putting together a 10,000 piece puzzle, and it turned into a book proposal and then a 460-page book.
This, folks, this is a very healthy book and it's very well written. I'm not through it yet. I got my copy, and I'm a slow reader. Let's put it that way. It's why sometimes why I like having authors on here, because you can kind of help me understand
Yeah.
the story. But okay, Paul, we got a little bit of an intro there. Anything to add to this? And then I'm really excited to jump into a discussion about what you learned.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for having us on, Steve. Yeah, I've been a journalist for 40 years. Worked at the local paper in Sonoma County for 20 of it, and I was first acquainted with the story because we're going to talk a little bit about the Tubbs fire, but Tubbs fire was this devastating fire that swept through our area. It's one of the most destructive fires in the California's history. It took the lives of 22 people, wiped out 5,600 homes. 5% of the housing in Santa Rosa was wiped out in a this single fire, and it swept over this complex. And so I had written about some of the stories of what happened at Villa Capri and Verena, and in a column, I was a columnist and wrote about this, and then we started having. And one of our protagonists of our story read my column. She got more involved, and and Beth is one of our key people in our book. And we, to this day, we have a very close relationship with her. So that's how I kind of got involved in this. And when Anne reached out to me and said, "Hey, what do you think about diving into this a little more?" I said, "Great, let's do it." And yeah, as she said, one thing led to another, and 5 years of work, it finally paid off. So
Man, and folks, before we came on, Paul's got some PowerPoints where he's going to share some photos of the real people here. But before we dive into this, that when a friend of mine introduced me to y'all and said, there's this book about this devastating fire and how it impacted a senior living community. And from the moment I learned about this, I was like, wow, this is required reading for anybody that is in the senior living business. And the reason is that we need to be prepared for the things that the unexpected. Forest, obviously in the mid-Atlantic, we don't have fires like you all have out in California, but we have power outages in the middle of the summertime when it's 150 degrees. We all need to recognize now with COVID that anything, we can get a left hook from any direction.
Exactly.
And I guess, not to kind of jump to the punchline, but one of the things your book talks about, the heroes and what they did in this tragedy. But I think one of the sad things is how the organization responded to this emergency and tragedy, that there's a lot of lessons to learn there. Correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they shouldn't have had to rely on ordinary family members to be heroes in this situation. They were unprepared. They were unprepared in so many ways that the book documents, from lack of evacuation plans, lack of training, lack of emergency supplies. No one had keys to the buses that could have transported half the people away.
Holy cow. Wow.
Yeah, these shuttle buses were sitting in the parking lot, and nobody knew where the keys were.
Man. Well, Paul, why don't we jump in, because I think your PowerPoint that you shared with me kind of documents the journey, and folks, especially if this is your first time coming on one of our discussions, one of the best parts is that it's live and interactive. Actually, I see we got Susan, who's got the book, and she's looking forward to reading it, but she lives out in that region, and was lucky that she did not so close that she had to evacuate. Okay, so what
this is
here? Is this the community?
This is the community. Just to let people know, this is a very high-end complex on a ridge line in our area known as Fountain Grove. And this is looking east toward Calistoga. So if anybody's familiar with the wine country, this is the topography here. And this main complex in the middle is Verena. This is the independent living community. And down here on the right is the Villa Capri, and this is the assisted living. And so our book focuses on what happened at these two complexes, where residents and family members came up to help the evacuation.
Out of curiosity, I'm assuming that this shot was taken after the fire. What year did the fire occur? Well, you're going to talk about that.
It was 2017, and this shot, I took a drone pilot friend of mine, and we got this shot after they had already rebuilt Villa Capri, which did burn in the fire.
Oh, okay. All right.
And Villa Capri is on the right. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a close-up look of Villa Capri, and our story begins with the two residents, two family members, Melissa and Kathy, being locked out as they're trying to load cars. And there's 24 residents, many of them, some of them in wheelchairs or walkers. Some were in memory care. There were some more that were on the second floor, and it was just these two women, and the complex is already burning. And they turn around, and the door, the power is out, and the door locks behind them, and they cannot get back in, and they're pounding on the door, and the residents are in wheelchairs, and they don't know how to help them. They can't help them.
And there's literally hurricane force winds outside, and the three sides of they're surrounded by fire at this point, and even parts of the driveway are on fire, and the shrubs in between.
Yeah, this used to be, so this is rebuilt after, so all this is new landscaping afterward, but this is and then this is a shot of Verena, the main complex, which overlooks this lake. And we tell the story of R.J. Kissling, who comes up from Petaluma, drives up into this courtyard in his truck, and he mainly goes there because his sister is bugging him at 3:30 in the morning to go check it out to see if their grandfather had been it was out, because they were worried if the fire was coming. And he gets there and the power's out, it's dark. He says, look, everybody's gone. I told you they would have had everybody evacuated by now. But she says to him, go look in the lobby, just go check to see if he's still there. So he puts on his headlamp, he walks into the lobby, and he finds 30 of what would eventually be over 100 people sitting in the lobby, and there's no staff. All the staff is gone. And this one gentleman gets up from the lobby, comes over to him and says, "Are you the firefighters? Are you here to save us?" And the grounds around the complex are already on fire. And this is what this. So these residents were essentially abandoned by staff. There were a couple that did stay behind, and we talk about them in the book, and they're real heroes. But by and large, many of these people were abandoned, and it's the story of the family members who came and helped these people. And they're really and that's what pulled us into you, Steve. You ask us why we wrote this book. We were pulled into this because of the heroes, the stories that were not being told. And as you said, the part of the problem was afterward, the owners of this complex, Oakmont Senior Living, basically denied what happened and tried to cover it up. And it was a chaos because it was a large fire at the time. But that's why Ann and I started unpacking and started talking to people and getting the real story of what happened. They claimed their staff was there till the end, that everything was organized. It wasn't. It was a haphazard, and there are a lot of people who were affected, who were traumatized by this. And so we were pulled into write this book because of the people. We fell in love with them. We fell in love with their stories. We wanted to tell it right. But then we also wanted to share the lessons, as you said. There's so many lessons here to be learned for people across the country, about making sure that the places where they're moving into have a culture of safety, and that was not in existence at this complex at the time. So
yeah, and Steve,
go ahead.
we're just because this was one wildfire in California, but we're seeing climate disasters in places we've never seen before. And on the East Coast, we see hurricanes and tornadoes and flooding and and freezes, heat waves, heat domes. We're seeing things that we haven't seen, and with prolonged power outages. And our contention is there are a lot of places like Villa Capri and Verena that are not prepared to take care of the seniors in their care. They are not trained, and they may not have the emergency procedures. And you can have the best emergency plan ever, but if your staff isn't trained or aware of it, it's not going to be effective when a disaster strikes.
Wow. And so, man, the region was really ravaged at this point in time.
Yeah, this is all part of the 2017 fires that really swept through the wine country. And a lot of this was fueled by, they had 70 to 80 mile an hour winds, very dry conditions. The humidity was just a tinderbox waiting to happen. And when the winds came through, we had some down power lines. It swept from, if you see in the upper left-hand corner, the Tubbs fire started in Calistoga and swept through to Santa Rosa. And it was a very similar path to a fire that happened in 1964. The only difference being that in 1964, the fire spread from Calistoga to Santa Rosa in 4 days. This one went the same distance in 4 hours. And it wiped out 5,600 homes, and there was 22 lives that were lost. Now, our argument is there were 4 others who people were rescued at Villa Capri and Verena, but there were 4 residents that were traumatized by what happened, and they died within 10 weeks of the fire. And the family members to this day say that it was because of the fire and the botched evacuations that they perished. And so we argue that the death toll should be at least 26, but the point is that it was a lesson of what not to do in a time of crisis, and we feel that there are lessons here that can be shared. So,
and one thing I'd like to note, I'm looking at the chat and someone's bringing up Medicare emergency preparedness rules for Medicare facilities. These were assisted living, and assisted living is not under federal government purview. It's there's a patchwork of state by state laws that, and every state differs in their regulations for assisted living facilities, and they're much more lightly regulated.
Yeah. And that's Anthony. Anthony is an EMS. He's got a very innovative EMS practice in the Washington area, and I'm really glad he joined this discussion. But he puts the list of the 17 specific providers under that, and there's long-term care facilities and intermediate care facilities for intellectuals with disabilities. But the other thing about assisted living is it's called different things in different states too.
Correct.
Yeah. So, okay.
And Steve, if we would, one point we want to make, we know that there are 2 million Americans living in assisted living communities across this country. I mean, there are over 30,000 of them, and there are more people moving in to these kinds of retirement complexes all the time. And a lot of them are very safe. We don't want to give the impression that they're not. Our point is that you want to make sure that you ask some questions about what kind of safety protocols they are doing. Are they doing drilling? Are they,
that's fire drills with residents, which Villa Capri had not done, nor had Verena. No, none of the residents had been through a fire drill, nor the staff. Nor
do they even know where the evacuation plan was, let alone what it was. They didn't even know where the flashlights were. So the question is how much training do they really have a culture of safety? I did a talk down in Portola Valley, down in Silicon Valley, just a month ago at a retirement complex called the Sequoias, and they're using our book to really change some of the safety protocols that they have. And the residents are very involved because they're very concerned. They're in a very similar area. There's only one road in, one road out when there's fires. And the old protocols of shelter in place until the firefighters tell you what to do don't really work when you have a firestorm coming through and you've got to get out. You can't wait for somebody to come and knock on your door and tell you when to leave sometimes. So,
well, and as you showed that map, and I'm seeing Anthony, an EMS former, working in a firehouse and what have you, I can only imagine when something like this happens to a region, the public workers, they're being deployed in a million different directions.
Exactly.
And how important that plan is in regions like this. Just like it would be important to have a plan if the electricity goes out in Atlanta, right, and we don't have air conditioning. It's like, what are we going to do with our residents?
Well, that's why, and we argue we need to take a look at our laws. In fact, a month before this fire in 2017, Hurricane Irma hit Florida, and there were 12 residents of a nursing home there that died, not because of the hurricane, but because the power was locked out and the heat went up, and they had and they died from the heat. Their body temperatures are over 100 degrees in some cases. And so Florida adopted a law that said you have to have nursing homes have to have backup generators in cases like this. Well, California, there's been a push for something very similar, but there's been resistance to it. The governor vetoed a legislation, and it's a very powerful industry, and they push back against it because of the cost. But one of the biggest problems here is there was no backup generators to operate the elevators in these two complexes, and there were a lot of wheelchair-bound residents in upper floors that couldn't get out. So,
wow.
Yeah, and so here we're just noting, as every day 10,000 baby boomers are turning 65. Assisted living communities are a loosely regulated industry. It's a huge growing industry, and we have more of these climate-driven events, and more often than not, it's seniors who are being injured or hurt during these disasters. We saw in the Camp Fire right here in Butte County in California, 75% of the people died were over the age of 65, and Maui Fire, something similar. You know, our argument is, look, some of these places are really great, but we need to do a better job of making sure that our seniors are the first ones rescued, not the last ones to be rescued. So, and these are just some of the everyday residents who went up there. These are the heroes from Villa Capri. These are the people we fell in love with, who shared us their story. And the owners of this complex basically discredited them afterward, basically said they were lying, that they weren't there to, you know, that they helped a little, but that they weren't the primary rescuers. And the two women on this photo are the last ones who stayed behind and put their lives at risk to save the last 24 as Villa Capri was burning. And
that's Kathy Allen on the left and Melissa Langles on the right. And they were so heroic. They could have driven away at any point, saved their own mother, saved their own relatives, and just fled. And they didn't. They were willing to literally die there to save all the residents. They had each Kathy had a back surgery and Melissa had a hip surgery in the last year. So it wasn't like they were you know, fully equipped to carry residents downstairs, but they managed to do that.
No, the previous slide, those three people, they had loved ones at the community.
Yes.
Okay. And so when they heard about the fire, immediately they're going to get their moms or get their loved ones. Okay. But then they stuck around and rescued anymore. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And so Mark and Kathy Allen raced there, and Mark Allen actually drove I think 7 or 8 residents to safety, and he was going to come back to for Kathy, but wasn't able to.
Well, they told him that their buses.
They told him that there were school buses on their way there.
But yeah, they basically lied to him because he feels, to this day, feels horrible about it. They all it worked out okay. But it was traumatic for all of them. They still have nightmares about that night.
Yeah, then, Melissa on the right cannot discuss any of it without crying. It's very traumatic. And then
and you'll probably dive into this, but because you opened the door and I'm curious. So they got their family members to safety, but then they went in and started assisting to get other residents.
Well, Melissa, she actually rescued her mom last because she knew that she would be too tempted to just take her mom and leave. Mm-hmm. And with her mother encouraging her, she rescued half of the residents on the second floor, escorted them out of their rooms, banged on doors, brought them out. Some people were in nightgowns. They didn't have their glasses, their teeth, and she would help them downstairs or bring them to the landing. Kathy and Mark went to every single room in the building to clear out residents before Mark left. And at any point they could have, and they thought they were going to die. All of them thought, because there were explosions in the background of houses exploding in the neighborhood around them. Yeah, so that could have happened at any moment. And the back of the building near where Melissa's mom lived was on fire. And Melissa got her last. And so she was Melissa's mom was among the last residents out. Mark Allen did drive his mother when he took residence. He made sure his mom was in the car.
But getting the residents heroes. But even getting residents in the car, that was just the beginning, because they then had to drive through flames and smoke, and it was horrific, what they went through to actually get them to safety at that point.
And I would like to say that the caregivers at Villa Capri were also very heroic. They didn't drive away with that. They drove away with, 2 of them drove with residents in their cars. One who was 8.5 months pregnant, and she left with a van of people that she then got stranded with seven residents in a parking lot, in a county parking lot. The med tech rode on a bus with residents on the first shuttle that took the first people out. But they were heroic too. They were traumatized. And so I don't want to give anyone, any of them a bad name, because
these were the
their
these
best
were the basic workers, the overnight shift workers
that were not trained.
The executive director said she called them and said she was on her way. She never showed up. We still don't know where she was for 6 hours. The executive director for Lorena did show up, but then he left with a carload of residents saying he was going to come back, and he never came back. And anyway, that's why, you know, they feel some of the workers who did stay behind, they were abandoned by the managers too. So that's part of our story.
We felt they were abandoned before, during, and after the fire, because, you know, one of the questions on our checklist for people is, how are your night shift trained, and when are they? You know, at Villa Capri, they were told to come in at 2 p.m. for a monthly training when they work nights. Is there a manager at night? Is there someone who's none of them were aware of an emergency plan, where it was kept? You know, and that was a failure of a culture of not having a culture of safety.
And Anthony is putting some great comments in there, but I like Ruth just said, I've been looking into a community that's not yet built yet. It seems a very important question to ask, what their emergency procedures are. And I think, Ruth, I think that's what Ann and Paul's one of the passion projects that they have with this book, and I agree too, is that the more pressure the consumer marketplace puts on buildings to think about contingencies and the safety of the residents and the safety of the staff. I mean, really, these caregiving jobs, I mean, these folks are heroes even before a natural disaster.
Absolutely.
They are taking care of our moms and dads, but they were equally, if not more, vulnerable, because now they're in the position of, you know, how am I going to get these residents out to safety?
That's that's exactly right. And so, you know, these are what we want to show here, that these are real people. These are real characters that lived at this complex. And these are wonderful people who often cases, you know, these are people who survived depressions and wars, and they were very well poised that night. A lot of the first responders and the residents we talked to who were up there were amazed at how many of them, they were far more calm than some of the staff were.
Ruth Callan, for example, on the left, 3 of her sons were firefighters. And
but
she
none of them were
knew
there then.
none of them were there, and she knew that something was up. She could hear the sirens. She knew. She was worried how, you know, she was thinking how ironic it is that I'm going to die in a fire. And her father had been a firefighter as well.
And out of curiosity, and because we've got Anthony on, I at some point I'd love to open up his mic and get a EMS worker's perspective on what happens in communities when emergencies like this happen. But you know, the sequence, you've got this, you know, it's on the news, this fire is ravaging the region. I got to go get my mom, you know, people get in the car, what have you. In your reporting, how long did it take for the firefighters to get to this? Because I know their hands were full, you know?
Yeah, the firefighters were really busy in other areas. It was a rescue. It went from a firefighting effort to a rescue effort, and they were just trying to get people out of their homes and away. And they were counting on places like this to take care of their own people. And so they were not, I don't think there was an expectation. I think even among the first responders, there was an expectation that this place had already been cleared out. In fact, there were people at barricades, and when they talked to the police officers there, they said, "Oh no, Verena and Villa Capri have already been cleared out," but they didn't know that they hadn't been. And so that's why it came down to residents and a handful of the staff who stepped up and saved these people.
We actually contrast what happened at Villa Capri and Verena with a facility less than a mile away. It's the Brookdale facility. And they had a plan. They had staff who raced up there. All the managers raced up there. They were told, if you get stopped at a checkpoint, just blaze on through, take the ticket. And they didn't wait for first responders to come and say, hey, you need to evacuate. The executive director got on the roof, looked at where the fire was, and said, we're out of here. And that, at Verena, at least, the executive director was waiting for police or someone to say, hey, you should evacuate. And as Anthony has pointed out, like in a disaster, all the resources, all the fire personnel, police, they were busy. You can't rely on that in a true disaster.
Yeah, and at Verena, they, like as I said earlier, they had a shelter-in-place policy. So people were coming down stairs. They were smelling smoke. The power was out. The alarm went off, but they shut off the alarm and they told everybody to go back to bed. Then when the power was out, they were coming downstairs, and the executive director kept telling them to go back to their rooms. And in many cases, they did go back to rooms. They were told to go wait for instruction, but then no instruction ever came. And all of a sudden they opened their windows and they saw their fires burning.
And I'm assuming that this is what you're sharing with us is probably documented through your reporting and your interviews with the people that were there, but the management company is probably disputing that, correct?
Yeah. We reached out. They disputed. They actually posted their own website refuting some of the stories that were being told by the family members. But the state launched an investigation. The Department of Social Services looked into what happened there, and they said it was one of the worst cases of elder abandonment they've ever seen. And they wanted to ban the two executive directors for life. And
close both facilities.
But the owner of this complex is very powerful. He's one of the top 10 largest assisted living developers in the nation, and they were able to push back. And they didn't get the lifetime ban, but the state did make them admit that they abandoned residents, and they had to do a number of corrective actions as a consequence. They also went after, so the story goes on, all the battle for accountability afterwards. And in fact, the local district attorney looked into this, into doing a criminal investigation into what happened. They ended up reaching a settlement where the Oakmont Senior Living paid $500,000 in restitution, agreed to a number of other changes. But then the owner of the complex, 50 days later, turned around and launched a recall campaign against a district attorney, and basically into retaliation for looking into this. And so it was a complete a community battle for accountability of what happened there. But
and did you show there's a picture of the building on fire, I think, that in one of your slides.
Yeah.
But the community needed to be completely rebuilt. I mean, it was completely
it was destroyed. Yeah.
Destroyed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Villa Capri. Yeah. And there was, as we noted, the fire was burning so intently. It was basically because this caught on fire, they got the attention. Also it was R.J. Kissling, and they raised the alarm that there were 100 people still up at Verena as well. but this fire was burning the fire was so intense, they couldn't get buses up there to get the rest of the people out of Arena. So they had these fire crews surrounding the complex, trying to create a safe perimeter long enough for the buses to be able to get up there to evacuate the people at Verena. That's why we say it's a very dramatic story of people, just remarkable people, including some firefighters in the end who fought back the flames to buy time for them to get these people off the hill. But in the end, Villa Capri burned. Verena probably should have, if it weren't for these fire crews. Some of them had very little water left in their trucks because they'd been fighting fires all over the county all night. But they were able to fight off the flames and buy them enough time to get the people off the hill.
Well, this is an amazing story. Ann and Paul, would you be okay if I invited Anthony, the EMS worker, to say a few
Absolutely.
words?
Absolutely.
I'm really interested in his perspective. Anthony, I just opened your mic up.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all those resources there, and thanks to your for your service.
Yeah.
But you're familiar as an EMS worker. We've had some chats before. You're familiar, obviously, with emergencies and disasters, especially with your business, but also you're familiar with the senior living communities. What are your just initial thoughts about this tragedy in California, and any insights that you might add from your perspective?
Absolutely. And as a disclaimer, I'm also was a certified emergency manager and business continuity professional, and also I've been part of the national disaster medical system with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services since Hurricane Katrina. So when it comes to disasters like this, preparing, responding, all that, I'm not just a responder, but a lot more on the strategic side as well as on the federal responses. And to answer your question, Steve, when you have a situation like this that is rapidly unfolding, it's ultra hazardous, it's in a non-permissive environment, even for responders. This is the worst case scenario. This is the sort of thing that even 911 can't make entry into this because their resources are completely overwhelmed and consumed. And so, there are delays in regional responses. There are delays in even larger delays in state responses, and even larger in federal responses. And so, I'm certain that the local responders were doing their absolute best, as you all have mentioned. It just, you take folks that are ordinary everyday workers that are faced with this. This is a terrifying situation, even for those who have all of the training in the world. And now you take someone who's not a firefighter, not a first responder, and you say, hey, go save lives. Those are heroes. Just hands down, every worker that was there. And just because the workers may not have been able to get to rescue, other persons, does not make them not heroes.
Right.
Just the ability and willingness to put themselves into this sort of situation, not just the fire, but the smoke hazards, are what we consider an IDLH environment, an immediately dangerous to life and health environment. These are non-permissive environments that you cannot enter into. And so this is the worst case scenario, just hands down.
And here, let me give Anthony a shout out here. I dropped his website, Emergility, into chat, but I never thought about it, but somebody like you, so when we think about lessons learned and the solutions, is an assisted living would be smart to hire somebody like you to help them map out a plan and administer training, as opposed to sort of, I can see it's like, oh, here's the 3-ring binder on emergency training. Is that something that you have ever done for communities?
Absolutely. Yeah, I authored the Northern Virginia National Capital Region's mass fatality, mass casualty plans back in 2009. So when it comes to this sort of stuff, absolutely. I've written several healthcare emergency plans for corporate healthcare, long-term facilities, other sorts of emergency facilities. This is something I've been doing for my entire career as a consultant. When you have like Paul and Ann, taking the time and creating this book and putting all this research into this, these are the case studies, these are the stories. This is what makes it real, right? This is how you share the story. This is how you create a compelling need to affect change. How do you affect change? Then you bring in experts that work in this space, that know how to write the plans, that know how to do the risk assessments, that know how to put in the correct protection measures to prevent this from ever happening again. We are very good at investing in response. We are very bad at investing in prevention and protection. Yet, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah.
Man.
Anthony, we should have interviewed you
Yeah.
for the book.
No, I'm blown away that you jumped it on.
Yeah.
It makes sense now. I know you get my emails, Anthony, and I'm really glad you joined us. And I've dropped some links to your website on there, which will also be on the recording link, because I think, this is one of these things. There's going to be people listening to this discussion, and it's sort of like, well, I don't know if my assisted living is prepared, but then what are the steps? And I think, Anthony, like, you're a great solution, consult with somebody like you.
And
I'd just like to point out that, not, as we said earlier, not all complexes are as unprepared as these are. Some take what Anthony's talking about very seriously. They do hire people like Anthony to come in, consult, give advice. A lot of them have very active senior resident councils that take a very active role in these kinds of preparations. And I think those are some of the questions you need to ask when you or a loved one are moving into a complex like this, is like, how active are you on these? Do you take these seriously? How frequently are your plans updated, drills, and just forums to talk about these kinds of things?
Well, I'll go one step further. And when you go to like an airport and you've taken a CPR class, what's the first thing you do? You look around for the AEDs. You look around for the fire extinguishers, right? The type of planning that we're talking about is extremely high level. It requires an all of organization approach. It requires risk management, legal. Everyone needs to be involved in this sort of planning, right? This is a facility operations sort of thing, right? But when you go look down at certain facilities and certain organizations, we have to start from the very basics. Do we even have AEDs and fire extinguishers in certain places? And we've done a lot of assessments and a lot of reviews of different facilities, and a lot of them are without those basic emergency capabilities, which is mind-blowing, right? For fire code, sure, but a lot of them don't even have AEDs. So how do you put in play a massive evacuation plan for organizations like this when they don't even take the right measures to put together the other basic things? Yeah. It is a cultural thing. You are completely right, Paul. Some are gun-ho and they are full throttle. They got it covered. Some are not. It's incumbent upon us in this group to educate consumers of these services and these facilities to demand that they have these things in place. Not necessarily just CMS law or state requirements and state regs, but consumers need to be aware that if you go and you stay in this facility, they may not have an emergency plan, but this one may. So you might end up choosing one that does as a consumer, as to be able to better protect your family member.
I would also say that not just having the plan, but well-trained staff, and we all know that turnover is high in this entire industry, but also involving the residents in the training. I know that, in drills, I know that Verena now has well-trained residents. We have residents who lived there before and continue to, and after the fire, and they say now everybody knows what to do. And they now have the training that they lacked at that time when residents were like, okay, do we shelter in place as we've been told? But this is a massive wildfire, so sheltering in place isn't going to be effective.
Agreed.
Man, this is great. Well, thanks for joining us, Anthony. I've copied all your contact info for folks that are interested in reaching out to you. I'll make sure that it's on the recording link too. And really glad that you were able to join us and share your insights with this discussion.
Thank you for the opportunity. And Paul, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. Same.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you.
Awesome. Wow. Well, that was a really great dynamic to this discussion that helps us see the light at the end of the tunnel. Is that it's you know, I really think that it would be very difficult for any community on the scale and size that you showed us on the screen to put together an action plan without an expert guidance from somebody like Anthony. Out of curiosity, when he brought up the AEDs and the fire extinguishers in your reporting, were any of those items utilized, and were they accessible to help people in the evacuation?
It's funny when RJ Kissling, he's our welder from Petaluma. He's one of these guys. If ever you're in a fix, you want this guy with you, top guy. And but he walks in the lobby, sees all these residents there unattended. First thing he says is, "Where are your fire extinguishers? Let's get them out and line them up." So there was that. But you know, when a fire of this immensity comes along, fire extinguishers are pretty small tools to use in that kind of a sense.
Yeah, but I tell you, like getting, you know, I could see again, I'm an untrained rescuer.
Yeah.
It's sort of like if I've got to get into Mrs. Smith's room,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
I can at least, you know,
At least
use
have
the
something
fire
there.
extinguisher would be
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and that was true because some people, you know, they slept with their windows open at night. And, you know, one of the rescuers, RJ, I can't remember if it was RJ or Michael, goes into a room and the window was open and there's embers coming in and he's stomping out the embers in the carpet. You know, that's exactly right. It's good to know where those were. But again, you know, nobody even knew where the batteries were for flashlights. The staff, when they were going door to door, they were using their own cell phones for the flashlights and their cell phones to get people out of bed, and their flashlights were end up dying, or their phones were end up dying because they were running out of power.
Wow. Well, this has been amazing. I'm going to drop the link to the book in again. One of the links that I dropped in, we had a chat last week with with a documentary film called No Country for Old People, and that's really talking about something similar but different in how, you know, many nursing home providers are putting profits before people. And I'd love to connect you all with that group, because I think there's a similar voice here in terms of preparedness, taking care of our loved ones, what have you.
Yeah.
Is there anything? Yeah, I mean, it's a thick book here, but is there anything that you haven't had a chance to sort of share with us about your investigation that you'd like to share in our remaining time?
One thing, and you may think about that, one thing we want to mention is one of the heroes we worked with was our contributing author and editor, Lauren Spates. She was, we brought her on near the end, and she really helped get us across the finish line. Steve, you point how thick this book is, and part of that is because the person who owns the complex is known for being litigious, and we were concerned. There were a lot of people who didn't want to talk to us because of concerns about they would be the target of a lawsuit, and we spent a lot of time vetting this with First Amendment attorneys and everything, and attributing everything. That we had to add an extra 50-60 pages just for attribution. But Lauren Spates was our contributing author and editor, and she really helped us get across the finish line. Our first draft was like 600 pages. She helped us get down to 400 and helped us so much in getting this done.
Now, how have you had any legal problems? Were you able to is everything
not yet? We have not had any problems yet. Knock on wood. Well, I would also like to mention, I don't know if I don't think you mentioned that Inflamed just won the investigative Reporters and Editors Book of the Year Award for
Wow.
2023
That was
for
very humbling,
investigative
yeah.
journalism. And we have a fabulous review from San Francisco Chronicle and Kirkus Reviews. We also won some additional awards. And that it doesn't read, it reads like fiction. And so even though it's a heavy subject, it's, you know, at heart are stories of heroes and residents who we grew attached to, and we hope our reader will too, because these were amazing people. One last thing I wanted to mention is when we had a book launch party and we invited many of these heroes up on stage, they've never received any official awards. They never received a thank you, no recognition from cities, counties, fire organization, nobody, and definitely not from Oakmont Senior Living or Oakmont Management Group. And we had we interviewed the heroes on stage, including R.J. Kissling and Mark and Kathy Allen, who were very humble and reticent to take credit, and Andre Blakely, one of these amazing employees who saved a woman on his own in a very dramatic fashion that you have to just read the book. And after interviewing these people, the audience stood up and gave them a standing ovation. And that was the very first time they'd been recognized. And that was 6 years later. They finally received an ounce of recognition for their heroics. But it should not come to employees, low-level employees and family members to be the heroes in these situations.
Yeah, and you know, like as Anthony said, I mean, when we have these disasters, they are a community, like the community comes together. We can't on something under every circumstance, you know, the idea that every fire station is going to be able to respond, but it really that it's having a plan in place that can respond to this. And you know, the thing that's troubling to me with this is that it's sort of like this is an area that has forest fires. Like, okay, like yes, this was a complete disaster, but it's an area that has forest fires, just like in Florida. You in the summertime, you are relying on air conditioning. Okay. So you need a plan because there is a high probability that the air conditioning will go out, that power will go out. And what are you going to do? And what are the steps that you take to minimize the tragedy?
Yeah.
And I think that's the lesson here is that, yeah, the nursing home in Florida should be prepared for any disaster, but they're probably not going to have a forest fire on the likes of that. But they need to be prepared, just like in Colorado, they need to be prepared for an avalanche, you know.
Well,
and
yeah. And Steve, you know, and so often our planning is geared toward the healthiest among us, right? That we need to, our planning needs to be based on the most vulnerable. You know, the people. What about our memory care residents? What about our wheelchair residents? You know, that they're not the last ones out, but the first ones out. And when a crisis does hit, and not enough of our planning is in that is on those veins.
And we saw that on display in the Maui fire. There's an assisted living facility that burned, and 3 residents died. There's very little has been written about that, but there were 3 residents there who did not get out. And that was, you know, not that long ago. So this is very pertinent across the country, not just fires, but every disaster.
Heat domes, everything.
Yeah. No, this is great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is truly a one-of-a-kind discussion that I've had, but I really think that this recording is going to be helpful for a lot of people in our segment. And as the professionals in this segment, but also, and I love the fact that we've got some folks that are investigating moving to communities that are on this discussion, who are sort of like, okay, here's another question that I can ask. And that's a really good question. It's also something that, like you said, Paul, when you move into the community as a resident, this is a great thing for a resident council to engage in as well.
Yeah. And we're happy to be a resource if somebody wants to reach out to us, that they're doing a book club, or they would like us to, we'd be happy to help. So
this is great. And
I will put my email address in
actually
the chat.
here, I got them. I just dropped both of them in, and
okay, great.
I'll make sure that that's also on the recording link, because yeah, this would be you all would be great speakers for a senior living community. And I tell you what, I would admire any senior living community that would have you come in and tell your story to sort of activate a resident council or what have you. That's a better way to think about this than sort of denial and you know and what you experienced out there in this community.
No, we appreciate when we've had the opportunity to do that, and I think it creates a healthy conversation for everybody, we think.
Yeah.
And that's our goal throughout all of this, has been to create a national conversation about this so that it doesn't happen elsewhere. And we want to thank you for having us on.
You bet. All right, y'all. This is great. We'll see you in August. And I can't believe we're burning through the summer this quickly. Forgive that pun. I did not mean to say burning through it. So anyways.
Thank you, Steve.
Have a great day. Thank you to everybody. And thanks especially to Anthony for